All right, howdy. Thanks for checking out this video. I have some exciting news I wanted to share. This is going to be kind of a meandering video of just some exciting personal news, and I thought I'd use it as an opportunity to share some more about my background. So, what is the news? I've had a piece of my writing accepted for publication in Door is Ajar magazine in the spring 2023 issue number 26. So this is my first piece of fiction that I've had published. It's the first piece of writing that I've had published in a print publication rather than just digital. And this is Door is Ajar's second issue that will be appearing in Barnes & Noble and Books A Million stores nationwide. So I am super excited. I heard about this late last year, that my short story would be published in this. I received my contributor copy in the mail this week, and it's just amazing. It's a super high quality print, like the paper's really high quality. The text layout and everything like that is really awesome. The formatting, all of that. So I'm super excited. I thought I'd use it to talk a bit about the short story itself, and but also just in general my relationship with writing over the years, because I've thought about it a lot in the past year or so. So yeah, I've always loved writing. Ever since I was super young, I would, have little notebooks and write little poems and songs, and eventually little stories from elementary school through middle school and high school. I remember I had this awesome Harry Potter notebook with, it was like emerald green with Hedwig on the cover, and that's where I wrote like my first songs and poems. And it's one of those things, it's hard to trace back why you had an affinity for something when you did at such a young age. I think I always thought in sort of storytelling, like one of my favorite things to do as a young kid was to play with action figures, but what I really enjoyed was like the choreography and the story of it, like here's the hero, here's the villain, and then I would act out this giant battle, all keeping the story in mind. Yeah, I don't know where that came from. Like my grandparents and my parents, we read a lot of like children's books together, and a lot of gorgeous books with great illustrations, and we were really we watched a lot of movies and stuff, so maybe that's where I was first drawn to the idea of storytelling and writing. But yeah, like it just sort of, I caught the writing bug early as a young guy, as a little dude. I remember like when I got my first MacBook, so I like saved up, I made a deal with my parents, if I saved up for half, then they would match and buy the other half of my first MacBook, because my oldest cousin Will had a MacBook and was really into like video editing and making music and stuff, and I thought that was just the coolest thing ever. So I really wanted my own, and when I got it, I spent a lot of time just writing stories. I forget what Apple's early software around that was. Like, I don't think it was just their normal plain word processor, but it had like storyboarding options and things like that. I'm blanking on the name, but I remember I tried to write this like big fantasy story, because I just read the Chronicles of Narnia, and so I was trying to like do something along those lines, like Harry Potter-esque, and that was, I mean, it was a flop, but yeah, so I got into writing really early on, and then in middle school I realized, hey, this comes kind of naturally to me. I have an easier time in writing class than some other of my classmates, and always did super well on my essays and just in writing class in general. And more importantly, I really enjoyed it. Really enjoyed the act of writing. I launched a blog when I was like 11 or 12, and it was horrible, and it was kind of just my dad's politics written in my own words, which was, as a 12-year-old, didn't amount to much, as you can imagine. But yeah, just always kind of wrote poetry and music, not like in some big way where I was always just writing poetry as a kid, not at all, but it was always part of my life. And yeah, I guess in high school is when I got like more serious about saying like, hey, I identify as a writer and I am drawn to other writers, and kind of could see that as a path for myself. My fiance Tessa in high school gifted me this amazing old typewriter, which I still have. And in high school, I started writing my first novel, and I was really influenced by the things you read at that age, like George Orwell, and Ernest Hemingway and F. Scott Fitzgerald. I was really into Great Gatsby, obviously, but This Side of Paradise and A Farewell to Arms by Hemingway, and The Old Man and the Sea, Sun Also Rises, like all that kind of stuff, and Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse, and then later The Beats and Jack Kerouac and On the Road had a great influence on my writing and the types of things I like to write. And then Allen Ginsberg in my poetry specifically. And I got really into spoken word because slam poetry was really big in that time, like 2012 to 2014. And started a poetry night at the coffee shop I worked at. And actually, that's where I first met a guy called Caleb, a friend from Atlanta, who I learned about Door is Ajar from, because he is a writer, and he had some poems in their winter 2022 issue. So that's how I found out about it. But anyway, I always was writing throughout high school. Yeah, started my first novel that I wanted to be like, you know, that classic literary white dude debut novel, was kind of the style of it, with that impromptu stream of consciousness, jazzy Kerouac influence definitely in there. Semi-autobiographical about moving to New York, which is what I did at the time. And then when I was in New York, I kept writing. I submitted poems to the New Yorker that definitely weren't ready to be submitted to the New Yorker. So I had ambitions. And in 2017, I started my blog, and I've been writing there up to today. And that was a place to have more discipline as a writer with my fiction. But all through those years, I always had pieces of, with my nonfiction on the blog, I don't know if that's what I said, but through the years, I always had fragments of stories and fiction on my computers and in my notebooks and things like that. And, but I never had that discipline system with writing in terms of fiction. My blog allowed me to have it with nonfiction, but I didn't have something similar with my fiction. So I just had sort of different lengths and made different progress on various projects during that time in terms of fiction. And so, I don't know, yeah, like I said, I had submitted some stuff around to like the New Yorker, the Atlantic, like these Wired, like big publications, and I don't know why. I guess I just thought like, might as well go for it. But I didn't try to do like the smaller publication things in online magazines. I don't know why. Until about 2018, my blog, I was kind of chugging along with my blog, and that's when I started my YouTube and stuff. And I was really trying to be more deliberate about putting my ideas and creativity into practice. And one late night, I was at ADIO, which is this co-working fabrication lab that I was using at the time in Brooklyn. And it was like 11:30 maybe, or, you know, late at night. And I just like started freehanding this essay. And the first sentence that started it all, this like prompt that opened up this cascade, was the sentence, "We like Persian rugs and odd coffee mugs." It's just this like sort of poetic thing. I was trying to think a lot about my identity and what's my aesthetic and what's my brand. And that became this giant essay that just kind of poured out of me, called Digital Infants, which ended up being about identity, how social media has changed the way we think about ourselves and has pressured us to pick like a self-brand, which was a big phrase at the time, and like find your niche and like specialize and have all these words and identities for yourself so people can easily digest what you're about. And it was about like sort of the tension I felt around that, but also about how it changed the way we talk to one another and our politics. And, you know, it's kind of the height of the Trump era vitriol online and things like that. Those were all a part of that essay, so it became this cool hybrid of a personal essay and like kind of a social analysis. And I was really proud of it, and I don't know why or how I came across it, but I just decided like, hey, I want to try to find someone to publish this. because I don't want to just put it out on my blog. And I found a magazine called the Broken City Mag, which is this Canadian magazine, and I submitted it for, I think it was like their winter issue or their fall issue or something like that. But they have these themes for their issues. And so a few months later, I got an email back that was basically saying, hey, we loved your essay, Digital Infants, but we think it'd be a better fit for our next issue in the spring, which is called The Social Animal, and all about sort of social analysis and how we relate to other human beings and things like that. So I was super happy about that. It was my first publication ever, and I ended up being the selected essay for that issue. And it was purely digital though. I think they sometimes do print, but mostly they're just purely online. So still awesome, my first publication ever, but there's something about having the print in your hand that makes it different. And yeah, I kept writing on my blog, but like I said, I didn't have an equivalent practice for fiction. I would just sort of chip away at various stories until last year. Last year, it's funny, one of the cool things about writing for a long time and having like sort of a body of work, so to speak, over time, is you can see your influences change because you know yourself, so you can identify it very easily in your own writing. And stylistically, but also intellectually. And like I said, when I was younger, my influences were sort of more literary fiction. Jack Kerouac, Ernest Hemingway, F. Scott Fitzgerald, that sort of thing. And then I kind of shifted more towards, I leaned into my science fiction interests and got really into Ray Bradbury and let's see, who else around that time? Frank Herbert, of course, with Dune, Kurt Vonnegut, and sort of that charm and humor and American nostalgia from Bradbury. You could still see like that poetry with Bradbury is still there, but that like sharper wit and that discipline is there with Kurt Vonnegut. And then, yeah, I think my latest shift happened in the past few years was towards Stephen King as a big influence, obviously one of the most well-known fiction writers, and also Jorge Luis Borges. And that was more of a genre influence from Borges. It combined that literary fiction that I like with that science fiction influence and the surrealism and magical realist elements that I love from like Marquez and stuff. And so yeah, it's funny to see your own influences evolving. But last year I got really into Stephen King, had a huge Stephen King phase. And he influenced my writing, my fiction writing, drastically in two ways. One was sort of the systems and practices, the technical toolkit. So check out his book on writing, which is his book about how to write well, and also a semi-autobiographical memoir. It's amazing. It'll pump you up to write. Definitely check that out. But so stylistically, implementing a system, right? Like introducing discipline into your writing practice. I had that with my blog, but I didn't have it for fiction. So reading Stephen King and hearing about how he worked influenced me to get more serious about my fiction. Serious, but to be practiced and sit down. If you want to write, you need to write. And so have a system for that. And I made a lot of progress. I wrote a lot of short stories, and that's another influence from him, like hearing about how he started by getting published in all these smaller magazines and publications with short stories, and then eventually published his novel. And that's kind of gone away today in terms of a path to traditional publishing, at least the way a lot of people think about it. Because you can't really get paid that well for short stories. But it's still super viable to get better at writing and to share your work. So I started writing a lot of short stories last year. I started having more discipline with my fiction writing as well, and not just my nonfiction essays. And then from Stephen King and his son, Joe Hill, I had some genre influence and a fundamental rediscovery, I'll call it, because it seems so obvious as a writer, but it's not, because you can get lost in the weeds. So the two influences from Stephen King were, one, the systems and the toolkit of being disciplined about your writing, and two, were more of the realization that seems to always be at the forefront of Stephen King's mind, and his son Joe Hill too. I got this from his short stories, which is so simple, but it's that you have to entertain the reader. And I think from my literary fiction influences and a lot of us who, the reason we love writing is because it's that exploration of language and that slower medium to take your time and think through things slowly. But with fiction, you really need to grip the reader. And so that was a huge influence on me last year, writing my short stories and my fiction, of really constantly thinking, will the reader turn the page? Is this a good enough hook? Is this concept exciting enough to keep the reader reading? So those were pretty big on me last year. And from that work, I wrote a lot of short stories last year, and I ended up writing about 18,000 words on one project that I think will be like novella length maybe, and about 14,000 words on another project, which could be a little longer maybe, but somewhere in that range. So around that time, one night, now it's coming back to my publication, my short story. Around that time, one night, I was walking my dog June, and outside the house, and the sidewalk we were walking down just had like a lot of cracks in it, like sidewalks do. And I was just thinking like, oh yeah, step on a crack, break your mama's back, and thinking about like elementary school and things like that. And then all of a sudden, just sort of, probably because I was reading Joe Hill's short story collection at the time, which has like some darker stories in it, the idea for this short story just kind of fell into place from that. It was one of those moments, like there's two types of creative processes, I think. One is like, you can get good work by just having the discipline, writing every day, refining what you wrote, and you'll find good ideas that way, kind of the discovery process. And then there's the process of just, you were thinking about the right things at the right time, you were on a walk or something, you were in the shower, so you were relaxed, and the idea just kind of fell into your brain. And that's the muse, that's inspiration. And what Stephen King talks about is you can't wait for those moments. And there's that famous quote like, you have to hunt your inspiration down with a club. I think, I forgot whose line that is, Bukowski maybe? Or like, yeah, it's like the muse waits for you to be working. Like if it finds you working, that's like Stephen Pressfield kind of idea. If you're working, then your muse and your inspiration will find you. And so yeah, there's those two kind of things. And this was the type where I was just right place at the right time. I'd been writing a lot, so I was thinking about stories, and the idea just clicked into place. So I ran inside and I wrote down sort of the beats of the story on a note card. And I ran to get Tessa and I was like, okay, I just had a great story idea. Do you want to hear it or do you want to read it? And she was like, I mean, either, whatever you want. And I definitely like wanted to share because I was so pumped by it. So after like going back and forth, I was like, okay, I'll just tell you. And I told her the idea and she was like, yeah, that's pretty sweet. You should write it. And so I'm pretty sure it was that night at like 11 or 12 at night, I just like sat down to write the story idea. And it just was like, boom, came right out, super easy. And I ended up, doing multiple drafts and everything, and like different detours of the story got cut out, and now it's just like sort of its essence. And I submitted it to Doors Ajar after seeing my buddy Caleb's work published there. And I had no idea about that they were physical print or that they had just gotten this amazing partnership with Barnes & Noble and Books A Million. And so late last year, like October or something, Tess and I were at a coffee shop and she was using the bathroom and I got the email that was like, hey, we love your short story, we want to publish it. And it was just like genuinely one of the most joyful moments of my life, because it's this like whole arc of loving writing and loving writers. And I had my nonfiction published, but it was digital and it's an essay, so it's not that thing that I love of reading a book or reading a short story. But this would be that. And in the first email, that's when I found out that it would be a nationwide print publication in Barnes & Noble and Books A Million stores. So it was just, honestly, it was amazing. It was incredible. And so yeah, my short story is published alongside some other great work that I've had the chance to read. I just got my contributor copy in the mail. This will be available in stores April 6th. There's also a pre-order link in the bio below. And yeah, I'll briefly tell, I'll read the first paragraph as sort of a enticing hook. But yeah, definitely check it out if you're into short stories and stuff, because there's a lot of good work in here. There's poetry, there's good photos, and there's a lot of great fiction. Okay, so this story of mine is called The Crack in the Sidewalk. It's on page 76. Step on a crack, break your mama's back. It was sorta like that for me, except I broke my own back when I stepped on the crack, and I was immediately and violently sucked down into it. So that's the little sneak peek I'll give you to entice you to read it. It would mean so much if you pre-ordered it or picked it up in Barnes & Noble or Books A Million. Hopefully the distribution and stuff is quick. And random side note, if you have a piece of work in here, whether it's a poem, short story, photograph, or anything, connect with me, because I'm thinking about doing sort of short little combos and interviews with other people whose work is in here. I think it'd be cool to all kind of get connected and share a bit about our pieces and just our journey with art in general. So yeah, I hope that was cool to hear. And I kind of wanted to just cement this as a video, as like a time capsule, because it's a really special thing for me. So thanks for watching. Peace.